You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dapper Reacts number something or other. Timothy Clarey isn't even trying. Or isn't trying, I don't know, it's 93. 93, Vishanti.
Nice.
You've been here for almost all of them. So, yeah. And I was asked, is Dapper alone today? The answer is no. But yes, I know that Vishanti wasn't in the thumbnail this time, which is unusual for me for a show that she's going to be on, but what can I say? I made a whole bunch of thumbnails in one day, which is usually a good way to tell how that day is going. Because if it's not going well, and I still feel like I need to do work, I just make a bunch of thumbnails for upcoming live streams. And that's why there were like 5 upcoming live streams already scheduled. Because it was a rough day. But that's okay. Alright. So, Vishanti, how you doing?
Well, I'm getting there.
Okay. Get coffee
Somebody in the chats, yeah. Somebody says that I'm wearing a sports ball cap. Like, it is baseball cap shaped, but it's Doctor Strange, the crew for the first movie. This is the hat that they had. Mostly because I don't actually yet own a Dodgers cap. And everyone's enthusiasm locally because of the World Series is really infectious, and I have found myself, for the first time in my life, wanting to buy Dodgers gear.
Put it on your wish list.
Yeah, I might do that. But yeah, it's so funny. Just I guess it's because this is the first time in a very long time that the Dodgers have been to the World Series, and it's here, like hosted here locally at Dodger Stadium. So yeah, the enthusiasm and the hype is very contagious, and I don't keep up with sports like that. I definitely don't keep up with baseball like that. I just happened to be scrolling yesterday, and I saw the clip of the game-winning Grand Slam, and that was actually really incredible. So I was impressed.
That clip,
Yay, athletes! Yay! So woohoo!
Yay, man who hit ball with stick.
Yes, that I tell you what though, the one thing I do like about baseball is that satisfying crack when they hit.
Yeah, it's a really
ball,
nice sound,
and it just. I love that. Very
loud. The sound of the ball in the bat connecting it's a really nice, very satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we are not here to talk about the Dodgers, as it turns out. We are here to talk about Timothy Clarey and Ivana Semide, whose last name I feel like I'm butchering still. Which, again, if Ivana ever sees these, please let me know if I'm incorrectly saying your name, because I don't. My goal isn't to ever mispronounce people's names, even people with whom I disagree, because I feel like the basic, absolute bare minimum level of respect that you give someone, even if they're a horrible, horrible person, which I'm not saying Ivana is you at least get their name right. Because, like, I don't know, I just feel like that's the absolute bare minimum of treatment for another person. Like, yeah, even, like, think about this. Even when, like, say, the government is getting ready to execute someone, they still try to get their name right in that process. You're about to kill a guy. But you at least get the name right.
Wow.
Okay, what? Am I wrong?
One final insult.
Yeah, it's like, we're going to execute you and we're going to get your name wrong. Like, no, that's not how we do it. All right, so they are arguing that birds aren't dinosaurs because, for some reason, not through my trying, but, like, this video, the one I'm doing on Jackson with Jackson this past week, as well as like 2 of the videos I did scripted responses to this month, are all just about birds being or not being dinosaurs from creationists. I can't get away from it for some reason. I'm gonna have to take a big break from it because holy crap, is it getting annoying. So let's see. We got one super chat to read. Roshina pre-Yiddish math tutor Keller for $1.99 says, did you try elote seasoning in ramen yet? Nami, I have not tried that.
Yeah, we were in some food discussion weeds the other day, and somehow elote came up, and they mentioned elote seasoning on ramen, and I I made a mental note that day. Like, I'm gonna try that.
Doesn't the cotija cheese make it like way too salty? Because ramen is already very, very salty.
I mean, if you knew the marinade that I've been using all week to make burgers and chicken as being like, oh, are you shying away from things that are too salty? My answer is just going to be to laugh.
Okay. Although I will say, mayonnaise in ramen,
Because that shit's
you know,
salty.
mayonnaise is a big part of the elote seasoning. But
Mhm.
mayonnaise in ramen is something that I will do depending on what else I'm putting in there. So like, if I'm mixing in a bunch of vegetables, sometimes that'll go in with some mayonnaise to, especially to thicken up the sauce.
Anybody that lives either in Alabama act like itself or in the deep south region, which is in the distribution network, will attest to the saltiness of Dale's marinade.
Okay.
It's not sold here in California. I had to have my mom send me 2 bottles, and it is salty AF.
Nice.
So good. It's so savory, and that's my favorite flavor is savory.
Oh. So there is the minor saga of the coffee pot, which some people might know that my coffee pot was
yes,
shattered early this week. And so I ordered a replacement that was supposed to be here today, and now it's currently not due until Tuesday. So,
Why do you even have Prime if they can't get you your stuff in the promised time frame?
Specifically asked the customer service that, and they said that the item was damaged when it arrived at the local distribution center, and that therefore they had to have another one shipped out. And I was wondering how I was supposed to know about any of that. But they were just really like, sorry. I'm like, all right. Hey, look. The guy I was dealing with is very clearly not the guy in charge of all of this. He's just some guy at a computer screen, probably in Pakistan. So, I say that mostly because of his name. Because he had a very, like, Central Asian Muslim name.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so he's probably not exactly, like, privy to all the details. But anyway, so that's an update to that saga.
Jillian says pour one out for Dapper's coffee pot, except he can't.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, I do have some mango lemonade with alcohol in it, so I can pour one of those out.
So. What kind of alcohol?
I mean, it's just great alcohol that's been added to mango lemonade.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, that sounds like a good time for some rum.
It would be, yeah, but it's just great alcohol. Okay. All right, so let's, look, we have the drinking rules going. We've been going for too long before we get into this, so let's just keep going with Timothy Clarey telling us why why birds aren't dinosaurs and how they're so different. And also, Elliot Gandermail has just joined the channel at the level of tetrapod, so everyone, please send in some tetrapod emojis to welcome Elliot. Don't do what Vishanti is doing. That is a betrayal.
Or Clay Dappy. You can put Clay Dappies.
Vadim Marchenko says you are morally compelled to switch to Mocha coffee makers. I'm pretty sure that actually is the brand. So, nice. Success. Anyway,
Vadim here we go. Is asking me what video game character am I cosplaying as today. I'm not cosplaying. And I had someone ask me if I what are you dressing up for as Halloween? I don't dress up for Halloween because I dress up at conventions, and I put a lot more effort into those costumes than most people care to for Halloween. Like, most people want to just have something fun, so you can go get an easy, fun, cost-effective costume at places like Party City. And
they don't all have to say slutty on them.
No, I do not. Well, I love the niche LA costumes that are coming out, though. Some of those are going to be really great for me to go through.
I saw one that was
Americana
sexy.
Brand means so good.
I saw one costume that said "sexy monkey," and I was like, "Isn't that just
a human?"
A human, yeah. If you're sexy, you're already going to be a sexy monkey. If you're a human, whatever. You know what? I'm not the costume designer.
What's the What was it? Bonobos that you sent me that photo of, and it was too much.
Yeah, too much. I actually might not be able to show it on YouTube because it might actually trigger their community guidelines. But there's a photograph of a bonobo stretching, and it just looks like a human with extra hair and like funny shape. Yeah, it's just like that's just a person.
That's a person.
Let's see. Roshan, a pre-Yiddish math tutor for Kellers for $4.99 says, "I don't like calling Amazon for shipping problems because they look through your past orders. It's creepy as heck." I mean, they already have access to my past shipping. Whatever, I don't care. I'm not embarrassed by anything that's on there. It's all just stuff like bits of food, kitchen gadgets, a fireplace, or like a fire pit for outside. Whatever. Like, if Abdul from wherever the heck wants to know that I purchased a fire pit earlier last month, he can know it. I don't really care. All right, here we go.
It doesn't make any sense. You can't have the ancestor before the...
We're talking about the temporal paradox. So this is what a so-called problem introduced by... Oh, I have a drink on the counter. I'm going to say that was me screwing up the production by putting a drink on the counter. Take a drink for it. Anyway, this is an argument put forward primarily by Alan Fiducia. And his idea is, since our earliest birds are from the Jurassic, and the later Cretaceous dinosaurs, which are seen as transitional, are after that, then that is some kind of problem. Well, it turns out, one, those very, very bird-like animals that were primarily in the Cretaceous have been found in small but increasing numbers in late Jurassic sediments. So that idea that there is this difference in time frame is becoming less true. Sorry. And also, from just a theoretical standpoint, it's actually not necessary that more basal forms can't be found later than more derived forms, because nothing about evolution requires that less derived creatures must go extinct when more derived members of their group evolve. That's just not a thing, right? You can actually see that even in modern birds. So, in order of like how much like Mesozoic proto-birds certain birds are, like ostriches are almost identical to many of the sort of pre-bird birds. They're very similar. They lack a lot of the later features that most birds have now. And then you can get to like ducks or chickens, who retain the more basal like limb anatomy. They have a weaker keel, which is why they're not as good as flying most of the time. And yet they have the more advanced jaw. Then you get into like neo-aves, where they even start to lose most of the hand claws, and there's more advanced keel and whatnot. And so, yeah, that's just how nature is. And Alan Fiducia has not, as far as I know, he actually even has not really been using this argument because, well, it's not really taken seriously by anyone anymore. In fact, none of his arguments are at this point, but hey.
Animal was actually in existence. Right. And so, for the descendant before the animal was in existence. So it's kind of backwards. And this is pointed out by a few people, but most people just, it doesn't matter.
Once again, we're not naming names here, which is weird, because creationists used to name Alan Fiducia. And almost all of his talking points are just Alan Fiducia and his buddies like Lingam Soliar and there's another guy, he's Chinese and I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Sorry, bandit guy who's from China. I can't remember your name off the top of my head. I was going to say nothing against you, but I do actually have something against you because you're just promoting crazy, weird nonsense in the scientific literature. But that is not a good reason for me not to know your name. I just can't remember it. I think it's Zhang. I think it's like Xamg, Zhang, or something like that. Now that I think about it, but if I'm wrong about that, I don't know. Edwin M has just gifted 10 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. Thank you so much. Let's take some drinks for them. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A little bit of a pause there because it's pretty cold. Okay, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. This is very sweet. This is sweeter than I would normally have something. I like mango, so it's okay.
I mean, here's convenient. Obvious, facts. Yeah. The rocks don't lie. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're taking a drink
Amazing.
For a young Earth creationist pointing out that the rocks don't lie.
Amazing self-own there.
Yeah, that is. Okay, hey, Tim. If the rocks don't lie, you have a much bigger problem than people arguing that birds are dinosaurs. And here's the other thing, right? One of the reasons that this so-called grandfather paradox isn't used anymore is because it's Alan Fiducia and company have switched tactics, right? They used to say that these bird-like dinosaurs weren't actually bird-like. They didn't actually have feathers and all of this stuff. But that has become so conclusively, completely blown out of the water that they've had to switch tracks. And instead now, they're saying that all these feathered dinosaurs aren't actually dinosaurs. They're actually members of an otherwise unknown lineage of archosaurs that started back in the Triassic. And we just don't have any fossil evidence for them throughout the entire Triassic and the early and into the middle Jurassic. We just don't have a fossil record for them, but they were there. And they're what evolved into birds.
Love to make stuff up. Just making stuff up.
Yep. I mean, technically, it's not impossible that there is a lineage of archosaurs that just didn't get fossilized, or we haven't found fossils of it. Because, every time we find a new fossil, that's something we hadn't found until that time. So, like, is that an impossible thing? No. Is it just making something up? Well, yeah, but it's making something up that's at least within the realm of possibility. And then he says that things like Velociraptor and Bapiosaurus and Therizinosaurus and Oviraptor aren't bird-like dinosaurs. They're flightless birds who, during the Cretaceous, lost the ability to fly and became ground animals, like a modern ostrich or a dodo, I suppose. Although, like a dodo with claws the size of longswords, so, a little scarier than just a dodo. Philipon Clapdog Half Canine, who's been a member for 60 months, says, "Oh, the irony, get bent." Yeah, it is definitely, where they come up with some of this stuff. So, so basically, creationists have not really gotten the memo that there's been a switch in the bandits camp, because creationists love the bandits. That's birds are not dinosaurs, right? That's banned. All the people who believe that, the bandits, whatever. They like their arguments because they're countering the consensus narrative, and they also want to counter the consensus narrative. But one of the things that the bandits like to point out is that they actually don't give any aid or comfort to creationists, because they're not arguing against the evolution of birds from non-bird ancestors. They just disagree that it's dinosaurs. And that doesn't help creationism at all. Like, how would it help creationism if the consensus were birds evolved from non-dinosaurian archosaurs that survived through the Triassic without a fossil record? It wouldn't. That's just as contradictory to their entire way of thinking as saying that birds are dinosaurs. So it's very weird that they're using all those arguments, because they don't actually help. And also, the fact is that birds being dinosaurs doesn't hurt young Earth creationism any more than whales being mammals does. So it's a very bizarre hill to die on. And yet so many young Earth creationists have decided it's one of the hills that they're going to die on. Like, I just don't get it.
You see a bird, and you see these so-called bird-like dinosaurs well above that. Mm-hmm. In the secular world, in their worldview, 40, 50 million years of time above that. So you have to evolve birds more than once.
No, that's... Let me take a drink. That's not how that works. What that means is that the group Aviale split off sometime in the Jurassic from other groups, like various Oviraptorosaurs, Therizinosaurs, Deinonychosaurs, and that the splits actually happened in the Jurassic. And then those various lineages just didn't go extinct until the end of the Cretaceous, with only a few lineages of what we now call birds surviving. That's what that means. It doesn't mean birds evolved twice. That's not a possibility under the theory of evolution. The fact that he's proposing that means that he fundamentally is either lying about evolution or just does not understand it. You can't have a group evolve twice, right? Like, there have been a number of different groups of legless tetrapods. We have modern snakes. We have Sicilians, which are a group of amphibians. We have legless skinks, which are a different group of lizards and snakes. We've got a whole bunch. There's even like legless amphibians from back in like the Carboniferous, I think. That are, it's not even clear if they're tetrapods really or they're stem tetrapods, but they're certainly not like basal fish. And they don't have limbs, and they are living very much like modern snakes. That keeps evolving, but you can't say snakes evolved multiple times because that's not what happened. A glass lizard, which is a kind of skink that doesn't have legs, is not a snake. It's not a re-evolution of a snake. Snakes have very different bodies, they have different skulls, they have very different ways that their eyes work, that they receive sound. They're very, very different from legless skinks. And so, even if you had multiple lineages of bird-like dinosaurs that evolved volant arboreal animals, those animals aren't birds unless they're actually on the line to birds. And again, this is going to depend on exactly what you want to use the word bird to mean. Bird is not a scientific term, right? We have different terms, and you can put the word bird in different places, right? You can put it in aviale, which is basically anything that's more like a bird than it is like a velociraptor. Okay. You can put it at ornithoraces, which is like real, like modern birds and enantiornithines and anything closer. You could put it at like Picostylia. You could put it at Alulavis. You could put it at Ornithuromorpha. There you go. These are all different clades that mean different things and contain slightly different groups of animals, getting smaller and smaller as you get closer to modern aves. And anywhere where you put bird is okay because bird isn't a technical term. But if what you mean is like bird in the modern sense, then most of these animals aren't even birds to begin with. Vandelli in 1998, member for 48 months and is at the amniote level, says, birds are dinosaurs. Next thing, you'll be telling us that birds are amniotes and tetrapods and vertebrates and animals and eukaryotes. Yes, I would tell you all of those things.
But how they get around that is they pull this fast one on people. And I actually saw this in a video I used to show in my dinosaur class I used to teach in a public school. They actually they dash a line down from those.
I'm going to say the idea that Timothy Clarey was teaching biology at a public school is kind of horrifying. It's like finding out that Eric Dubé is teaching geology. Like, that's not okay. Like, I'm not a big fan of having like religious tests for public positions. But if you're going to teach a subject in a school, you should be required to actually know the subject. And Timothy Clarey either doesn't know the subject or is actively lying about it. And I think both of those are disqualifiers for teaching that subject in a public school. So, yeah. In the same way you would not hire a flat earther to teach earth science or geography, you absolutely should not hire a young earth creationist to teach geology or biology, or history for that matter, or astronomy, or chemistry, or physics. I guess geography is fine. English is fine. Yeah, you can hire a young earth creationist to teach geography or English. That's fine.
Dinosaurs, like the Velociraptors, down below Archaeopteryx, into the Jurassic, for example.
Hey, Dapper.
And then they take Archaeopteryx dash line down to
Dapper.
that and say, oh,
Yeah.
He mentioned Velociraptor.
He did.
What does raptor mean?
So raptor is, technically it means snatcher or grabber, something that grabs with the hands. And it is usually applied to birds of prey.
Birds of prey.
Yeah.
Birds of prey. Birds.
Yep. It was actually Jurassic Park that popularized using the word raptor to refer to dromaeosaurids. Which is interesting because now that's just a pretty typical thing. And now dromaeosaurids are frequently named with the morpheme raptor in their names, which was not that common before Jurassic Park. So
I happen to know that Auburn University has a raptor rescue center, and I think it's just really funny that he would mention velociraptors and then start talking about dinosaurs not being birds. Maybe they should be named something that's not applied to birds then. Dork.
Yeah. Cognitive trifurcation says, would it be fine to allow a young earth creationist to teach English? I feel like they try to teach the King James Bible. Actually,
They
I'm
can't
not.
parse the King James Bible.
Well, there's
That's
that,
nonsense.
yeah, which is part of what Alex Markle then followed up with. But here's the other thing. I actually don't think it's unacceptable to teach the King James Bible as a work of literature in an English classroom. it's been a very influential work in English literature for centuries now. And so I actually don't think it's unreasonable to use it as an example of influential literature in the English language. I don't think you should be teaching it as a holy book in your English class. But if someone said, like, oh yeah, we're going to use the King James Bible and talk about its influence on later English literature, its pervasive, the way that various phrases from it have pervaded English literature, using itself.
If they taught it alongside Shakespeare to show you how the language of the time worked,
that too, yeah,
I'd be completely fine with that.
Yeah. I am definitely not someone who is opposed to the Bible ever entering into a public classroom under any circumstance. I think there are indeed circumstances where it is perfectly reasonable to introduce the Bible or other holy texts. Right? Like, if we were doing a subject on like Arabic literature or Iranian literature or something, I think it would be perfectly reasonable to introduce the Quran as something that people should be reading at least parts of. Obviously, the Bible is too long to read all of it during a class like that. The Quran is much shorter, but still, it's pretty long.
I would also say, like, if your school is cool enough to have non-Western literature courses, which is
unlikely,
few,
but yeah.
Yeah, it's few. If you introduce, like, East Asian or South Asian literature, you can include Bhagavad Gita, you can include the I Ching, you can talk about Taoist writings. Like, there's a rich
the Taoist corpus is so much bigger than the Bible.
I know.
It's absurd. Roshino pre-Yiddish math tutor Keller for $4.99 says, drinking hot orange tea while listening to Dapper and Vishanti is so calming. Oh, well, thank you. I do appreciate that. All right, let's get a little bit more, Tim.
Here's a common answer to the both.
Okay.
Okay, again, so this is something he kept doing last week. There is a difference between an ancestral form and a transitional form. So I'm going to go back over it because it's easy to mix these two up because the concepts are very closely linked to each other and it's very easy to conflate the two. They're not the same thing. An ancestral form will be transitional, but transitional forms do not need to be and almost never can be said to be ancestral. So an ancestral form is actually what your ancestor looked like because that is directly your ancestor. So think about it like this, right? Let's say that you think about your mom, and then you think about her mom. Probably know both of those people. Maybe not, but most people have met both their mom and their mom's mom. Now think about your mom's mom's mom, and then keep doing that, right? Think about her mom and her mom and her mom going all the way back millions of years. Eventually, those moms won't really look like a modern human. They'll have a different form. That is an ancestral form. Now, it's not clear if that form is exactly any of the species that we have discovered. Because one of the things that's true about most lineages is that any given species is usually one amongst a group of very closely related species. And if there's enough of them that we're finding actual specimens of any of them in the fossil record, then that's also a good indication that there's more than one species. Which means that that person or animal, whatever, that's your ancestor 3 million years ago, even though your direct line ancestor, right? That individual is a member of a population that has related other species around. And if we find one of those, then most of the transitional features that are actually in your ancestral form will also be present in the closely related other forms. And those are still transitional. Because what it means to be transitional is to have some of the derived traits from later in the lineage, while keeping more of the more basal traits that the later lineage has gotten rid of. So, for instance, a basal trait in apes is to not really have a forehead. So, like, that thing that's keeping Vishanti's hat from sliding backwards? It's her forehead. Now, it's not that other apes don't have that portion of the skull. Those bones are still there. But instead of forming like a vertical wall, they just slope backwards, which means that by and large, you can't really have a chimpanzee or a gorilla wear a ball cap the way that a human can. It won't sit right. You would have to make a custom cap for them. So that sloping is a basal trait. And we see that as something that Australopithecus still has. But when we start getting to things like Homo erectus, those bones are starting to become more and more vertical. And they're not even as vertical as they are in Homo sapiens in, say, even Homo neanderthalensis. By the time you actually get real anatomically modern Homo sapiens, you get that forehead. And so that is a loss of a basal characteristic. Whereas, say, like the enlarging brain case, that is adding a new characteristic, or the arches in the foot. The exact shape of the arches of the foot of Homo sapiens are a derived characteristic. And while, Australopithecus had a sort of semi-human-ish arch structure, it wasn't exactly the same. And so when you have this mix of later derived characteristics and earlier basal characteristics, you have a transitional form regardless of whether or not it is ancestral. And so anytime someone mixes up an ancestral form and a transitional form, they're getting something fundamentally wrong about how we talk about evolution and the fossil record and how those two things relate. Ancestral forms had to have existed, but we can almost never know that we've actually found one. And we don't need to find them in order to say that something is transitional. I hope that was clear. It felt rambly. I don't know. Did it make sense to you, Vishanti?
No. I mean, yes, but also I tuned out halfway through because
Darn it.
ADHD.
Darn it.
But it doesn't exist. It's a phantom lineage. It's called a ghost lineage for a reason. They just make it up. And there's no...
Of course, the problem is that, okay, there's a few things. I'm going to take a drink, because ghost lineages aren't just made up. So what is a ghost lineage? A ghost lineage is a lineage of animals, or anything else, that isn't in the fossil record for a certain period of time, but that we know had to have been around somewhere during that time. An example might be, if we get away from animals, the Wollemi pine. Now, the Wollemi pine today is only known to exist in a small part of Australia. But members of that same genus were around at the end of the Cretaceous, fairly widespread. They were a fairly common plant. Now, no matter if you are a creationist or not, if Wollemi pines are found in Cretaceous fossils, and they're not found in any Cenozoic fossils, but they're still alive, that means that the Wollemi pine had to have lived through the period when Cenozoic fossils were being deposited. Unless you think they time traveled. So those are the options, right? We have time-traveling pine trees as one option. I think we can probably dismiss that. And the other option is that we have a ghost lineage of Wollemi pines. That's not made up. That's a logical necessity of the fact that these organisms are found at different points without an intervening continuous fossil record. So, ghost lineages aren't just made up. If you have a fossil record of a lineage that stops, has a big gap, and then starts back up again, they had to have existed in the intervening time, and that's all a ghost lineage is. It's a lineage we know has to have existed during the intervening time, but that didn't leave a fossil record that we know of. Coelacanths are the same way. We stopped having coelacanth fossils at the end of the Cretaceous. We know they're alive now. They have to have been alive throughout all of the Cenozoic period, no matter whether you're a creationist or not. So do we have a ghost lineage of coelacanths? Not made up.
Science behind it at all. Mm-hmm. They're doing verification science. They're out there trying to prove what they already think they know.
Mm-hmm. No, that's creationist. Stop projecting.
Oh, we'll just take another drink for just how much projection that is.
Good Lord.
Wow, yeah, that is... It is hard to imagine anyone who projects more than young Earth creationists. It is amazing. Because here's the thing, right? If you want to join the Institute for Creation Research, you have to sign their statement of faith. A statement of faith, I will point out, that isn't even like so broad that it can just be universally signed by any Christian. Like, there are a number of Christian groups that could not sign that pledge regardless of their belief in young Earth creationism. So, like, yeah, and their blogs that they pretend are journals, those have themselves statements of what conclusions you're not allowed to come to and which ones you are. If you want
That's not science.
Yeah, if you want to publish in like Creation Quarterly or the Answers Research Journal, your research has to be supportive of the basic tenets of young Earth creationism. If it's not,
yeah, that's
they
just
won't
the thing.
publish.
It's like, yeah, when they tell you what conclusions you're allowed to come to, you cannot then turn around and say, "Oh, we're trying to uncover the truth," and it's the evil atheist evolutionists who are trying to confirm their own biases. Like, bro, you made me sign a bias sheet.
Mm-hmm. And also, they like to say that that's what's actually happening in real peer-reviewed journals. But here's the thing.
And it's not.
It's not.
But they do it. It just, God.
In fact, one of the ways you can tell it's not.
self-awareness.
One of the ways you can tell it's not is the source for many of their arguments in this video, which is Alan Fiducia and his buddies. You know where they publish those arguments? In the peer-reviewed literature. And they're going against the consensus narrative when they do that, and they still manage to do it. So it's not that these journals are turning away so-called heterodox opinions or conclusions. They're not. If you can make a good case, and you can get it, can get evidence, data, get the formatting right, RAW-mat, that's an important thing. You actually have to follow the formatting guidelines or they're just not going to accept you at all.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, then you can get published. The reason creationists can't get published is because they can't even make the minimal requirements of having an argument that isn't directly refuted by their own data.
Love that. Cell phone.
Yeah.
Also, cognitive trifurcation says, I will now be referring to statements of faith as bias sheets from now on. So, you're welcome, I guess. That's what they are.
Look, if you have a statement of faith that you want for like membership in your religious organization, that's like a church or some kind of congregation.
Yeah, totally different thing.
Yeah, okay, cool. Because you have the purpose for that organization is for the people who believe the similar things to you to get together and do things as a group who all agree on these things. But what you're doing in those cases isn't science. So if you want to have a statement of faith for, like, Clarey's Church of Christ, okay, cool, whatever. That's fine. I don't care. I'm not going to complain. I might disagree with some of the things on there, but that's not my business. I'm not a member of Clarey's Church of Christ, and I wouldn't want to be. But when you're going to purport that you're doing science and that you have a scientific journal, yeah, no. Statement of faith, not appropriate.
It's just, again, bias sheet.
Although, I have heard from actual former AIG employees that worked at the Ark Encounter that the code of conduct was widely flouted by the employees, and there were competitions for like how obvious a place people could engage in activities that violated the sexual conduct clauses of the Ancestral and Genesis code of conduct.
Almost like human beings are horny.
And also, like, some teenagers who are getting a job at the ice cream stand at the Ark don't give a crap about...
extremely horny?
No, not only that, but also just really don't give a crap about any of this stuff, and it's just a job. They're just slinging ice cream, and they don't care about any of this, like, worldview nonsense. Let's see. Vandalia 1998 for $4.99 says, Eric Hovind's Night at the Creation Museum was so unrealistic because they would never hire that unbelieving security guard in the first place. That is actually an excellent point. Yeah. You actually do have to sign a statement of faith in order to be hired by any of those organizations. So yeah, they would not have hired a... Okay, they might have hired an unbelieving security guard, but it would have been one who had lied by signing their statement of faith. Because that's the thing, right? Like, if you sign a statement of faith, that doesn't allow anyone into your brain to see what you actually think about these things.
Yeah, they can't mind read.
Yeah. Triple Plunk, half dog, half canine for $5 says, it sounds harsh, but all of this is why I refer to apologists as professional liars. Look, I haven't seen every single apologist out there, so I can't say all of them are liars. However, I can say many of them that I have seen.
I was going to say some of them are just repeating what they've heard other apologists say.
Yeah.
So they're not lying because they don't know that they're repeating something that's not true.
Yeah. And those are also usually not the ones
that know better and are still saying it. Those are liars.
Yeah. There's definitely like a group of people who are like, oh yeah, I'm an apologist. And it's like, well, what was your training in that? It's like, well, I watched a bunch of William Lane Craig videos on YouTube. Okay. You're probably not lying to me. You're probably just believing whatever he says. Which, whatever. Then again, I'm also not here to just do straight up counter apologetics. If it doesn't contradict with science, I'm not usually here to talk about it. Although every once in a while, I guess I do get into things like nonsense versions of like Bible history. Like if you're going to try to argue with me that like literally everything in the Old Testament is historically accurate, like it's just not. It's just not.
No.
But yet the geology and the facts don't support it at all. They don't support that dinosaurs evolved into birds. We see birds first.
Wrong.
And then these
Just completely wrong.
Yeah, it's
100%
Even if-
opposite of truth.
even if it weren't, it still wouldn't contradict birds being dinosaurs. Rusty Longshanks, who's been a member for 15 months, says, "I just got here, but I want to say that AIG is a gab of skittles." We'll take a drink for that. Thank you very much. So why is this not? Even if what he was saying is true, why is this a really bad argument? Okay, so if you pick a group of dinosaurs, when they were first discovered, we didn't have a whole big transitional lineage going back to more basal dinosaurs, right? So for instance, when we first found stegosaurs, we didn't have the full history of Thyreophora mapped out, and where ankylosaurs come from, and Scelidosaurus and Scutellosaurus and all these things, right? We didn't know about all of these. But we still concluded that they... Oh, drink for Mothra, I guess. But we were still able to conclude that they were dinosaurs, even though we didn't have a transitional series from other more basal dinosaurs to Thyreophorans like stegosaurs. How do you think we figured out that they were dinosaurs? Well, they had the anatomy of dinosaurs, which makes them dinosaurs. The same thing is true for birds. This is something that creationists, I have never yet met one who would do this. Right? Who will actually give a detailed definition for dinosaur that can actually be used successfully to determine if an animal is a dinosaur, even in edge cases, right? Like lagasuchids. Anyone who looks at a lagasuchid or even a papasaurid, probably going to say that's a dinosaur. They're not. And you need to actually know the technical reasons why not if you want to actually make that determination. And generally speaking, creationists understand that that is a thing that is the case, right? They tend... The ones who are actual degree holders who are purporting to actually be scientists, they don't generally mix up things like pterosaurs or lagasuchids or pulposaurus or things like that with dinosaurs. They know they're not. But what they will never do is then tell you why it is that birds aren't, for the similar reasons that you can tell that, say, lagasuchids aren't. And that's because if you actually follow through with an anatomical definition for what makes a dinosaur, you can't actually separate out birds. So what are you going to do? Say birds don't have a deltopectoral crest that's about 35% of the length of the entire humerus? I mean, you can say it, but then you can just go look at a bird humerus and say, nope, it's right there. That's it.
It's literally the same stupid thing that creationists will be like, apes don't have the whites of their eyes showing, when you can literally just look at any picture of apes.
Yep. My favorite one...
Google image search and see the whites of their eyes.
My favorite one, I think it was Brian Thomas, was saying that while on screen, in his presentation, there was a picture of a gorilla with its eye whites showing on his own slide. It's like, dude...
I just can't take these people seriously.
Yeah. And so that's why you never get them defining these things. The most they ever say is, you'll say things like, oh, well, dinosaurs have an open acetabulum and their legs are upright. Well, okay, one of those things is pretty important, and the other thing is important, but you're getting it wrong in terms of exactly what it means and how it can be arranged. And then they'll just go on and lie and say, well, birds don't have open acetabula. And I actually found out where I think they get that. It's actually from another Fiducia paper that I only recently read, in which, for some reason, Alan Fiducia's argument basically comes down to, if you don't have a supraacetabular crest, then your acetabulum can't be perforate, even if there's no bone on the medial margin of the acetabulum. And I'm just like, that is not how words work, sir.
This drives me Google debunkers.
Now I realize that's a whole bunch of weird, technical jargon, but it's sort of like saying, what's a good example? It's like, they're saying, hey, if you don't have a prominent brow ridge above your eye socket, then you just don't have eye sockets. No, that's not how that works.
That's not how that works.
Yep.
Dinosaurs that are somewhat bird-like, but not really. Above that.
Somewhat bird-like, but not really.
What does that mean,
Bro,
Tim?
pick a lane.
I would love to know what it means for, say, Velociraptor to be somewhat bird-like, but also not really.
Not really.
I mean, let's see. It had remiges like a modern bird. It had a semilunate carpal that allows its hand to fold like a modern bird hand. It had flexible shoulder joints like a modern bird that allowed it to make grasping gestures towards prey that are actually very similar biomechanically to flapping gestures. Its pubis was not really facing forward, which is the typical arrangement for saurischians, but it was actually facing down, which is itself intermediate between the posterior pointing pubis of modern birds and the anterior pointing pubis of most theropods. Like, what makes it only not really bird-like? What is it specifically? I don't know. I don't think he's going to tell us.
The not really should have a little footnote, and at the bottom of the page you see, because I don't want it to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is ultimately what it is.
It's hard to rectify it when you have really, it's there right in stone right before their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Notice how little specificity he has.
Anything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's all vague.
It's all just like, well, it's not really this because I said so.
I mean, it's kind of this, but not really. And it sort of is, but, like, only technically not really. Like, come on, man. That's not science.
No. Well, I mean...
Like, have you ever noticed how whenever scientists are writing papers and doing their stuff, they will define the terms that they're using right at the start so that you're not confused by vagaries? And yet, creationists want to be like, oh, these evil scientists and these atheist evolutionists, and then yet they will never define their terms.
Yep.
They just depend on the common understanding of bird, as if that matters to any freaking scientist.
Right.
The same thing the way they're like, oh, theory in the common sense.
In fact, the video that I
ridiculous.
just published yesterday for early access, the entire argument from the creationist there, whose name is Joel Lineweber, by the way. I found out how to pronounce it after I'd already recorded the entire video in which I called him Lineweber. So,
Oops.
Joel, sorry, I couldn't find a place where your name was pronounced, but then I found it afterwards, so I will try to recalibrate for future videos about you. My bad. But basically his entire argument is basically, hey, if I just redefine both feather and bird, and then use a whole bunch of equivocation, then suddenly birds aren't dinosaurs anymore. And that's it. His entire thing is just, if I play enough dishonest word games, and I've defined birds out of Dinosauria. Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Fits of Bice.
Oh my god.
Fits of Bice Sheets Rage. That was fast.
Yay!
He's been a member for 15 months. And it's at the amniote level. Says, AIG is a conglomerate of a certain sporting goods store with a Godzilla, a Mothra, a Ghidorah, a Clay Dapper, and 5 different hardworking, patriotic tunicates. And then...
You know what? That might be the first time I've had somebody take one of my offhand nonsense statements and make it into their display name.
Well, congrats, and we'll take a drink for it. Also, JMCA Does Lifts sends a membership milestone chat for being at an amniote for 8 months that I'm going to have Vishanti handle.
What?
Yeah, you're in charge of this
Why
one.
would you...
Look at
Why
it.
do you think I can read modern Hebrew?
I don't know, because
when I'm
you have
in
a better
biblical
chance.
Hebrew classes.
You have a better chance than I do. I'm not even in biblical Hebrew.
I mean, I can parse this out and tell you what it probably might mean.
Let's see it.
Like, I recognize Breshit, so that's probably referring to beginning or Genesis, maybe. So, Tshuva, answers in Genesis.
Oh.
Sean McLeod. If I had to just take a wild guess, AIG's a bag of dicks.
I'm gonna say that is probably true, and we're gonna take a drink for it.
Let me know if I'm close. JMCA Does Lifts.
Well, isn't okay? So after Bereshit, isn't that they? Isn't that the
Him?
Is it him?
Well, yeah. You have to. Him is like the masculine plural.
Yeah.
So you have to refer to that group of they are.
They. But also in this case,
So,
it's being used as like a stand-in for a copula, right? Because then it follows with other noun phrases. So it means answers in Genesis are, and then so I'm pretty sure answers in Genesis are a bag of dicks.
Hatshuva, Breshit, him,
In
Shkit.
case people are wondering,
No.
generally speaking, Semitic languages don't normally have a verb for to be. Although Arabic has a verb for not
Hebrew
to be.
does.
Does it?
Hebrew does. Yeah.
Weird. Hi.
Yeah. Because that's actually how you get the conjugation of God's name in several places. Eya, Esher, Eya.
Arabic doesn't have a verb
I will
for
be
to
without
be.
will be, and then Vayahi is and it happened, or and then it happened. Haya is a conjugation. So yeah, to be is that verb.
Arabic doesn't bother with a verb for to be, but it does have a verb for to not be, which is confusing.
I mean, there are places where there are verbless clauses, obviously, but yeah the haya to be like.
Look, Russian even often.
I know things.
Russian is also reluctant to bother with a verb for to be. They have one, but they're like, we don't need to use it very much.
Yeah. We'll just have a gajillion freaking cases for every verb.
Verbs don't get cases.
Or not
for every noun?
It wasn't the verb cases. That wasn't what I was talking about.
I mean,
my brain
tenses?
saw a chart. It wasn't for tenses.
Moods?
Y'all just watched my brain have a complete, short circuit.
Aspects?
Glitching in real life.
I'm just coming up with all sorts of different things you can conjugate verbs for. Mood, tense, aspect, volition, evidentiality.
Obviously, I haven't finished this mug of coffee.
Yeah. Right.
Nuclearo says him is both they and the plural masculine conjugation of haya.
A few people point that out, but most of them just ignore it because they ignore the dinosaur or the bird paleontologist who says, these are not protofeathers, these are collagen. They ignore him when he says these are feathered birds with bony tails, they're not dinosaurs.
Okay. Once again, I'm getting really pissed off that they won't name him at any point. Name your source, man. Name your source. It's a pretty basic level thing that you do. You name your source. Savage.
And yes, you were correct that it's the nouns for the cases, and there's too many.
In Russian?
Yeah. I didn't like it.
You should learn some Suomi if you think there's too many noun cases in Russian.
Oh no, and that's not even getting into Swahili. I gave up on that real quick.
Swahili
is... It's like, oh, Greek, you think you have a lot of tenses? Hold my whatever drink is popular in
Here's
Kenya.
a fun thing about Swahili. Swahili's main syntactic strategy for marking syntactic use of nouns is actually based on gender marking on the verb as well as the gender of the noun, because Swahili has just a crap ton of genders, which means that the gender of the subject and the object are very rarely going to be the same. And you inflect the verb for the gender of both the subject and the object of the verb, which allows the nouns in the sentence to have a free word order without you needing to bother to mark them for case.
All those genders in Swahili, it's woke now. Also, Vadim is saying copulative verbs are an exception in Russian. They're often replaced by, all post-Slavonic languages.
Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $4.99 says, Pittsburgh English doesn't even have a phrase for to be either. Generally speaking, it is also omitted in many sentences in African-American vernacular English.
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
Having an explicit copula in a sentence is actually a thing that is cross-linguistically not very common. Most simple declarative statements that could use a copula in some languages, in many languages, just don't have a verb. Sometimes they have pronoun that disambiguates, but that's about it. Go ahead, sorry.
Vadim added, blame Ukrainian, it retained the vocative tense that got dropped by Russian.
Hey, you know what? The vocative tense is one of the... it's a case, but whatever. The vocative case is one of the cases that gets dropped very frequently in languages, but I like it, so good job, Ukrainian. I appreciate you for keeping a vocative case. Heather Schrodinger's Fossil Coon for $5 says, in Russian's case, the present tense of to be doesn't exist. Past and future exist, but not present. Yeah, that's usually the most common strategy for dropping the copula, is to just not do it in the present tense. Or the simple aspect, if you're a language that cares more about aspect.
Yeah, you don't really need it. Most times you can understand what people are saying without it. So.
Mm-hmm. And he gets ignored. And he knows bird.
Oh, right, Alan Fiducia. Alan Fiducia isn't ignored. Alan Fiducia is refuted in the literature. Right? So, for instance, part of the reason that the paper, whose name is something like The Color of Cretaceous Dinosaurs, which was a paper that came out of, was a group of Chinese researchers who were doing research on Sinosauropteryx, which you might know from the name, is a dinosaur from China, which is where we're getting a lot of these really nice avialan and close to bird dinosaurs. And in that paper, they took one of the exact fossils that Alan Fiducia used as one of his poster children for collagen fibers being the explanation for these fibers seen on the outline of some dinosaurs, especially coming out of China. And they conclusively show that they were integumentary structures, not collagen fibers, by finding the melanosomes and actually being able to map them onto the body such that they could recover the original pattern of the body markings of the animal, and found that it had ringed tails, it had a ringed tail and bandit markings like a raccoon. You can't get that from collagen. Yeah, poor Dinosaur got abandoned.
Deep cut.
That's actually something I've now started to use, but only with people who get that inside joke, abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who are wondering...
That's got to be, what, 5-year-old meme by now?
Something like that, yeah. For those of you who are wondering, the flat earther J.M. Truth had a bunch of his filming equipment taken by his former partner, not romantic partner, his filmmaking partner. And he put out a tweet after she drove off in his van with all of his stuff. Like, help, I've been...
absconded.
Yeah, he said, help, I've been abandoned. Not abandoned, just abandoned. And JM is famous for being really bad at spelling in English. Yeah, he's misspelled his own name in the credits to his own movies before. That's
one hell of a flex,
yeah.
I gotta tell you.
So, anyway, here we go.
It's better than most people in the world. He's a bird paleontologist. He knows his ancient birds. Mm-hmm. Yet, they're ignored.
No, they're not. They're directly refuted. They are responded to in the literature. What's ignored is
literally the opposite of not getting attention is
right.
being refuted because people put enough attention on it to refute it.
Right. It's like, look, lots of stuff that is not the consensus and that does not become the consensus gets published. That it doesn't become the consensus is not because it was ignored primarily. It's usually because direct refutations are published. And that's what's happened with Alan Paduccia. Every single one of his arguments as to why birds are not dinosaurs have been published in actual real peer-reviewed journals and have been responded to in actual peer-reviewed journals. And the consensus has not shifted away because he has not successfully made his case. Rather, the people responding to him have. That's not being ignored. That's being wrong. And they're not the same thing. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kid's Cobra, who's been a member for 23 months, says AIG is a bag of what approximately half the population uses to do the other copula. I'll take a drink for that. All right, here we go.
I need more coffee.
And you know what? It is a good time to take a quick break.
Approximately time for a break.
Yep, so here's what we're going to do. Yeah. We're going to go to the intermissions. Now, I am going to play the teaser for the next Star Trek Lexington. However, you will find that the date that I quote in that is, in fact, in the past. That is because we had to cancel this week's game as a result of, 3 players having come down with some kind of illness, as well as one other player who had a work emergency that didn't let him get back in time. And so, rather than playing with, 2 players, we decided to cancel. So, the game that...
Or you break. Go ahead.
So, that game is actually going to be taking place on the 8th of November, not on the 25th of October, like the teaser trailer says. What did you have for us, Bashanti?
I'm checking with Al Trucker to see what accent they'd like me to read their super chat or member chat in, because right. I'm getting the very strong sense that is a typed out accent.
Well, when Al Trucker gets back to you, then we can read it out after the break. So that way we'll have time for you to practice. All right. Well, enjoy this coming attraction for Star Trek Lexington, which is on Top Hats Off, as well as then Musical Silence by Beethoven, and we'll be back with fresh drinks. Next time on Star Trek Lexington.
Captain's Log, Stardate 5896.5. Now that we have finished repairs to the hull, engines, and sensors, the Lexington is once again ready to get back into deep space. We've been tasked by Admiral Banna Stoker to return to Kumbari 2. Apparently, strange emissions have been coming from an unexplored region on the side of the planet opposite of the Aurelian settlement, and we are to investigate. The mission has been marked as high priority and confidential. We're at warp now, and are due in the Kumbari system later today.
Kumbari 2 is a verdant M-class world full of lush vegetation and more than a few species of dangerous wildlife. Now it seems to hold a secret buried beneath its ancient surface. The crew must avoid the natural dangers of this untamed wilderness, but it would appear that they are not alone. A familiar face is also interested in the ruins, and not for simple scientific discovery. Can the crew discover the source of the strange readings and avoid being eaten, all before their rivals find the source themselves? Find out on October 25th, 2024, only on the Top Hats Off channel. We are back, and I believe that Al Trucker's membership chat has been, the accent question has been answered. And by the way, Al Trucker has been a member at 18 months at the annual level. And, Shanti, take it away.
AIG be a gunny sack a lily liver lambasted louts long left languishing listlessly listing lured lamprey baits to chum the brine.
Very nice. We'll take a drink for that. Fresh for the Croxagore, who's been a member for 8 months and is at the annual level, says, a transmission from biologist Gene Ross. Hello from my assignment aboard the USS Yorktown. Work's been crazy. Hope all is well aboard the Lexington. Well, things are about to not be well aboard the Lexington. That is sort of the theme of Star Trek Lexington, is that the Lexington is never in a good spot. It's always going poorly.
Everything happens so much.
Mm-hmm. Vandalia 1998 for $4.99 says, imagine if Star Trek had a ship called the USS Creationism. Its 5-year mission to spread lies about evolution. Ugh. Yeah, pass on that one. That does not sound like a fun show. Sounds like an infuriating
That's just a
show.
Romulan psyop from the Earth Romulan War.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They're disguising themselves as a human ship. Actually, the Tal Shiar. They're working on it. Yeah. I actually had some of my players when we encountered cloaked Romulan mines from the Earth Romulan War. I thought Romulan cloaking technology wasn't really known about until like the TOS era with the Balance of Terror. I'm like, well, these are just invisibility screens, like it says in Enterprise. They're not real cloaks. Like, oh, okay. It's like I do appreciate though that you guys knew enough about the Star Trek canon to know that there is a weird little wrinkle between when Romulans get cloaks and versus the invisibility screens from Enterprise.
Phase pistols aren't phasers, so
No, they're not. In fact, I made sure to point that out.
Plating.
That they encountered a crew from an X class ship, the Was it the Columbia, I think? And
But also,
they had face pistols.
Future Guy and the Suliban, all that time travel nonsense, probably just tweak some stuff, you know.
This is true. All right, here we go.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit the mainstream idea. So unfortunately,
Right.
it's kind of like mainstream science drives what people believe, and unfortunately,
Okay, but Tim, I gotta ask you something, because it was not always mainstream science that dinosaurs are birds, right? In fact, for a while, this is an idea that actually came and went for a while. It was actually relatively popular in like the later parts of the 19th century, because people had noticed that like Archaeopteryx seems like a dinosaur. If you like look at a bird skeleton, there's a lot of similarities between them and certain dinosaur skeletons. But then in the intervening time, up until like basically the 70s, like the 1970s, we didn't find a whole lot of extra evidence beyond just like Archaeopteryx that was supporting this contention. Dromaeosaurids were still a very poorly known and very few examples that we could look at. And it wasn't really until like Deinonychus was really found with good specimens and was really examined. And people realized, oh, dinosaurs weren't just lumbering cold-blooded lizards. They were much more like birds. They were probably warm-blooded. Many of them were active predators who were, like chasing down prey at speed. And a whole lot more like birds than we thought. And this started to bring back up the idea that birds are dinosaurs. So how come that idea is currently only being defended because of the mainstream idea, and yet it wasn't the mainstream idea just less than a century ago, and now it is? How did that happen? Why wasn't the old mainstream idea defended that way? Is it maybe because science actually doesn't just defend mainstream ideas because they're mainstream, but instead ideas become mainstream because they're currently the best evidenced idea, and in order to overcome that, you need to provide better evidence? And that just hasn't happened with Alan Fiducia and his buddies? Maybe that's actually what's happening, Tim. Because, of course, that's what's actually happening. You can overcome the mainstream. You just have to have better evidence. And if your evidence is, hey, I think this is collagen fiber, and then someone else says, well, no, it's absolutely definitively not collagen fiber, well, then guess what? You're not going to overcome the consensus that way.
that's what's in the museums. That's what's in the movies. Yeah. We're going to see new movies about dinosaurs with feathers on them, and there's no evidence whatsoever that any dinosaur had feathers.
Cry about it.
There's
If you don't like the movies people are putting out, don't go see them. They don't cater to you. Not everything is for you.
Also, I'm putting this over Vishanti's face for just a minute, but sorry, Vishanti, your face is currently being censored, but it's being censored by fossils of feathered dinosaurs. So, hey, Tim, what are those?
No.
The reason that we put feathers on dinosaurs in movies is exactly the same reason that we put eyes on dinosaurs and feathers. Because they had them. And we have fossil evidence that we had them. In fact, there's more fossil evidence for dinosaurs having feathers than there is for dinosaurs having eyes. Because I can point to a whole bunch of different dinosaur genera in which we have direct fossilized feathers. You know how many fossilized dinosaur eyes we have? It's none. It is more questionable as to whether dinosaurs had eyes than it is as to whether or not some of them had feathers. Just want to let that sink in for everyone. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kid's Cobra for $9.99 says, you mean the Ark Encounter is a time-traveling Romulan ship? It all makes sense now, especially Commander Kenjim's poor human design. Looks like a werewolf costume. It does. Yeah, no, that's definitely what's happening, is the Ark Encounter is actually a Tal Shiar psyop. And we know from, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, that the Romulans are all doing all sorts of stuff coming back to the 21st century to mess with the timeline. That's why we haven't had the eugenics wars yet, is because of Romulan interference. And also because, for some reason, the producers of Star Trek keep wanting Star Trek to be a possible future and aren't okay with it becoming an alt history, which it has been for decades already, so just get over it.
Honestly, maybe the Romulan meddling is why we haven't had Irish unification yet. We've got less than 2 months to go.
Yeah, the Irish unification of 2024. Come on. Ireland. Northern Ireland. Get on it. Let's go. Of course, by saying that, I've basically just come out as a Republican and not a loyalist. So, because the other thing is, like,
I mean, what's there to be loyal to, honestly? Who cares?
Here's the thing, right?
We're past that.
if the majority of Northern Ireland would rather stay part of the UK, I do think that they shouldn't be forced to not do it. Right? Like, as much as I'm in favor generally of Irish unification, I also am not a big fan of saying to people who currently want to stay in their current governmental system that they're not allowed to, and they are now going to have it imposed by other people. They must change which country they belong to. I'm generally not a fan of that. Because that itself kind of feels like colonialism, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. I'm also like, look, you want to say that you're Irish, but also not be governed by Ireland, so what are you doing?
Yeah. Now, Arthur M says, does sclerotic ring count as an eye fossil? No, but it does count as skeletal evidence that you had an eye. Which is why I think, and just orbits also count as that, which is why you should reconstruct dinosaurs with eyeballs. But did you actually technically find the eyeball? No, you did not. You found a ring of bone that normally goes around an eyeball. But hey, if we're going to be questioning whether or not these dinosaurs that actually have preserved fossil feathers have feathers, it's at least as reasonable to question whether or not they had eyes. Especially since we don't actually have the direct evidence that we do for the feathers.
Mm-hmm. Those appear to be all birds that had feathers.
You mentioned this a little bit, but as far as the issues that this poses for evolution, can you...
Which is none. It's literally none. It's so none.
You kind of point that out, at least from our perspective.
Well, what's interesting is if it's the Bible, if it's the biblical.
I'm just going to take another drink. Our fossil evidence of dinosaurs fits the Bible. You know, the fossil record laid down in rocks that couldn't be flood rocks, no matter what.
Yeah.
And even if they could be flood rocks, the actual ordering of the fossils doesn't fit any flood model. And all of our flood models are physically impossible because all of them would turn the Earth into a ball of plasma rather than a flood.
Don't worry about it.
Here's the thing, Tim. Before you can say that any bit of physical evidence fits your model has to be physically possible. It currently isn't. Now, maybe you can find some way in which the current data does not fit the consensus view of the past. And hey, maybe you're right. Maybe it doesn't. But in order to fit your model has to meet the bare minimum of being possible. All of your current models are physically impossible and should be dismissed for that reason alone. Now, I'm perfectly happy to talk about other reasons why we should dismiss them because I happen to think it's fun. And my audience seems to as well. But fundamentally, until you can get to the point where you're physically possible, nothing fits your model. Nothing. So, yeah.
Story of the best. It doesn't fit evolution. You don't really see any evolution.
Yeah, all these transitional fossils that evolution predicted and creationism, in fact, counter-predicted, not evidence at all. I'm just taking another. Tim, the fact that you don't understand that the grandfather paradox is not really a thing isn't an argument against evolution. It's just you not knowing what you're talking.
Even if, you can argue these ghost lineages, if there was an ancestor to both that evolved the Archaeopteryx, the bird, and then had to re-evolve again.
Again, no, nothing ever re-evolved into birds. That is incredibly dumb, and I'm taking... Look, Tim, you
re-evolved into birds. That's even worse, my dude.
Oh, yeah.
Why did they...
Hey, creationists out there, you probably don't appreciate it when edgy atheists describe your religion as the belief that a Jewish zombie is going to save you from what he's going to do to you if you just eat his body. You probably don't appreciate that.
Isn't he a lich, not a zombie?
Well, I'm going to go with zombie because it's even farther away from the actual belief that is generally what Christians believe, right? Because I'm intentionally making an absurd straw man of what Christianity is, right?
Okay.
So you probably don't appreciate it. Why is that? Well, it's because that is not an accurate way to describe what you actually believe. Similarly, when Timothy Clarey says things that aren't even possible under the model of evolution that we have for past life, it says to everyone who does understand evolution that Timothy Clarey doesn't even know what he's refuting. You should expect better from you creationists, which is not the same thing as you Christians. But creationists out there, and I know some of you watch this show. Some of you sometimes come into chat, some of you sometimes come into my comments. You're out there watching, and it's fine. Welcome. But I need you to know, you need to demand better from the people who purport to be thought leaders in creationism. You need to be able to get them to, at the very least, actually argue against evolution. Because right now, once again, we just have creationists, even creationists with good educations, just acting like flat earthers, saying, well, we see too far. And then you do the check to see if you're actually seeing too far on the globe, and no, you're not. Right? It's exactly the same as some flat earthers taking in this like, oh, hey, look, I could see this mountain from 50 miles away, but the horizon, according to the globe, is only 4 miles away, so I shouldn't be able to see it. Yeah, that's a straw man of the globe. Similarly, if you say that evolution says that birds re-evolved in the Cretaceous after having already evolved in the Jurassic, you're straw manning evolution. Stop it. It's a bad argument. It makes you look very, very stupid. Savage, they're evolutionizing our kids. Cobra for $4.99 says, why isn't there a transitional form from a ICR apologist and an honest human? Ironically, I would argue that we actually do have transitional forms there, and that is like the original deluge geologists. So, back before we really had a good handle on geology, there were a bunch of competing ideas as to what formed the rocks of the Earth. Because people did notice that there were different rocks that came from different places, and clearly they had different ways of forming, and they came from somewhere, right? Because they had an evident history. They had fossils in them. They had signs of erosion in them, stuff like that. And at one point, it was a plausible and reasonable and argued for argument that there was in fact a deluge that was the same flood referenced in the Bible. And people put forth good faith arguments for it. And people put forth good faith counterpoints to it. And the evidence at that time was not conclusive. Those people right there, those are the transitional form. They're the ones who have a very similar basic belief about geology and the history of the Earth to what young Earth creationists today have. But they were doing so in a time when you could hold that position in good faith, because we didn't know as much then as we do now. That's the transitional.
There's still no evidence of that. But the Bible talks about a global flood where you have the systematic burying of the world. The water kept getting higher and higher, and you see these different levels being buried, the Triassic level globally, and then the Jurassic level, then the Cretaceous level.
So ICR usually goes with what's called ecological zonation for how the fossil record gets sorted the way it is. The idea is basically that low-level environments and habitats are buried under Noah's flood earlier, and are therefore lower. Of course, one of the problems with this is, hey Tim, how come almost all pterosaur fossils are older or lower than almost all bird fossils? Very little overlap. Why is that? It doesn't make sense on any kind of ecological zonation, because what both birds and pterosaurs have in common is that they can just fly. They should both be found at the top. And further, we find marine fossils all the way up through the ecological column, and we actually don't find lowland organisms in the lowest strata that are basically out of time according to what evolution would predict. So for instance, water lilies, or lily pads, right? Lily pads are just the leaves of water lilies, the plant. They are a very common low elevation plant. You don't find a whole lot of them up on mountains. Instead, you find them in places like swamps and ponds and whatnot that tend to be lower elevation. You know how many, say, Jurassic lily pads we have in the fossil record? None. According to ecological zonation, they should be down in like the Devonian and the Carboniferous. We don't find any of them. So, yeah, same thing with cattails. Not horsetails. We do find horsetails way at the beginning. So where are my Carboniferous water lilies? Or skunk cabbage? Or mangrove trees? All of these are low elevation plants. Coconut palms, also a low elevation plant. They're not at these low elevation that Clarey is proposing, or that ICR is broadly proposing. So his idea as to how the flood orders the fossils doesn't even work if we ignore the physical impossibilities of the flood. Even if we just hand wave that away and say it's all just a miracle, it still doesn't actually explain the ordering of fossils. It explains things the way that like a 5-year-old might explain things, who can't actually think through the implications of their ideas. They just go with whatever kind of seems reasonable to them at 5 years old without thinking.
And those are the levels we buried all the dinosaurs. And some of these birds, like Archaeopteryx, they couldn't fly that well. They kind of estimated it flew like a pheasant, so it couldn't fly great distances. Got trapped a little bit earlier. Exactly what you see. And the Bible also talks.
Okay, then why were there expert flyers among the pterosaurs that were trapped even earlier than that? 'Cause- sorry. One of the things I want to point out is that the adaptations to flight in pterosaurs are actually even more extreme in most cases than the adaptations for flight in birds. They have even lighter bones. They have an even more complex setup for upstroke muscles to add power. They have at least as powerful downstroke muscle. They have a more efficient takeoff mechanism, which uses the flight muscles to help propel them into the air. So unlike what we used to think that pterosaurs probably had to like drop off of cliffs to actually get airborne, no, it turns out they were probably better at taking off than modern birds are. Because modern birds use their hind legs, which means that they have to have extra heavy hind leg muscles just to take off. Pterosaurs didn't have that problem. Pterosaurs had much lighter weight skulls proportionally. Their skulls were basically just a bunch of bony struts that were just enough to support the anatomy of like the soft tissue of their heads. Why is it that these even better adapted flyers are caught in the lower levels of the flood? ICR doesn't have an explanation for this. Pillbunk, half dog, half canine for $5 says, quote, a certain other YouTuber, even if it were possible, we know for a fact it didn't happen. Exactly. Yeah. And who was that? Professor Dave? Who was that? That sounds like a professor. I'm not actually sure.
Not salty enough, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, Professor Dave usually gets saltier as the video goes. Which, to be fair,
I don't know,
I do
man.
too, but I just don't get nearly as salty as he does.
I don't know. I mean, his opening salvo against some of the last dorks that he's debunked been pretty aggressive out of the gate.
Crypto457 says the Nyctosaurus didn't have extra fingers. It's true. Nyctosaurus reduced all of its digits down to the one flight finger. Kerry Ronston for $5 says, that's unflattering to 5-year-olds. I'm sure that at that age you understood that food needs storage, especially when bringing snacks on a trip. Okay, maybe that is unfair to 5-year-olds. That could be, yeah. Oh, here we go.
Talks about dinosaurs were created on day 6 with all the land animals.
Arn-Ra.
Birds were created the day.
Oh, Arn-Ra, okay. Okay. You know what? I've been on stream with both of them together. Go check out Arn-Ra's channel. I did a stream with Professor Dave, Arn-Ra, myself, Jackson Wheat, and Gutsa Gibbon. It was quite the
You and your deplorable ilk.
Exactly, that was what the stream. It was because Gunther Beckley wrote something for Evolution News, which is the Discovery Institute's creationism propaganda outlet that is disguised as a science news outlet because it's called Evolution News. And he referred to all of us by name and then said, and their deplorable ilk. So we all decided to stream on Aaron's channel because we'd all been called out by name by Gunther Beckley, who had since edited that in an effort to memory hole that entire event.
Screenshots are forever.
Hey, Gunther, yeah, we remember. That's why my Twitter handle is still deplorable ilk.
Earlier, day 5. So it totally contradicts what the Bible says if you believe that dinosaurs evolve into birds.
Right.
Because the Bible says...
Doesn't matter if it
flying and
contradicts the
swimming
Bible, does it contradict all available evidence?
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to take a
That's
drink for this,
science.
because this is an even worse argument than you think, right? So
It can't be true because it contradicts the Bible. Like, bro, that is the worst metric possible.
yeah. So not only does it not at all matter to science whether or not something contradicts the Bible, it's not a thing that anyone in science cares about. But even then, it doesn't. And here's 2 examples as to why. So, day 5, according to Genesis 1, the sea and the flying creatures are created. Right? Now, typically we think of fish and birds when we think about that. But that's not what the text says. The text says the flying creatures and the creatures in the sea, right? So, according to creationism, and Genesis 1, if you're going to take it the way that the creationists do, on what day were bats and whales made? Day 5. Now, on what day was the bulk of mammals made? It's day 6 with the land creatures, because the bulk of mammals are land creatures, like lions and elephants and aardvarks and sloths and anteaters and coatis and, I don't know, binturongs. Yeah, I'm naming a bunch of obscure ones for you. Check them out. They're all cool. Anyway, so creationists are okay with mammals being split between day 5 creatures and day 6 creatures. Because I've yet to find a young Earth creationist who denies that bats are mammals or that whales are mammals. Similarly, you can go with things like, okay, what day did God create the pterosaurs and the sea turtles? Because that seems like it would be day 5. But then he made like the sauropods and triceratops and the lizards and snakes, which are lizards, but whatever. And the rest of the turtles, like tortoises and whatnot, on day 6. So creationists are also okay with reptiles being split between day 5 and day 6. So here's my question to creationists. Why are dinosaurs different? Why are dinosaurs so special that they can't have been split between day 5 and day 6 when you're okay with other groups of organisms being split between them?
Oh, I know. Reasons.
Yeah, it's special pleading, basically. Yep. And it's an argument that does not even work on the terms of young Earth creationism. Because remember, they're not just trying to deny that birds evolved from dinosaurs. They're trying to deny that birds are dinosaurs, which is why they go back to Alan Fiducia, even though they've stopped naming him for some reason. It's because he says that they're not dinosaurs in the first place. And for some reason, that's a hill they want to die on. Now, they don't all want to die on it, right? Like Matt McLean and Marcus Ross are two creationists who are totally on board with birds being dinosaurs and there being non-avian feathered dinosaurs. They are 100% on board with that. They have written numerous pieces on their own like website, as well as published in creationist outlets, I'll say, arguing that creationists should drop this whole argument that birds aren't dinosaurs, drop the argument that there were no dinosaurs that weren't birds but had feathers anyway. So they get why this is a dumb argument. I just don't know why the rest of creationism is following along. I believe also Todd Wood agrees with them on that. Todd Wood is basically my poster child for someone who I think can actually be reasonably called a honest creationist. And here's how he had to do it. By admitting that basically there isn't any evidence that would lead anyone to conclude that creationism is true over evolution, but he thinks it is anyway, and he wants to try to prove it. Which, I mean, good luck to you, man, but by acknowledging that there basically isn't any evidence for it, you have removed any reason for anyone who is not already biased in favor of young Earth creationism for non-scientific reasons to believe it. And Todd Wood is open about that. He's like, yeah, no, I believe this for religious reasons, not because of the evidence that compels me. Oh, okay. I mean, I would consider that to be somewhat intellectually dishonest and illogical, but at least you're not lying to yourself about the evidence or to other people about the evidence. So, sure, good luck.
Paid on day 5, and then land animals like dinosaurs on day 6. Yeah. So, but again, what we find in the rocks matches what the Bible tells us, that there are always dinosaurs, there are always birds, and just the order of burial is all.
Hold on, no. We're going to drink again for a different reason. The fossil record does not tell us that there were always dinosaurs. Dinosaurs do not show up until late into the Triassic. That's pretty late. Dinosaurs have not always been around. We do not find their fossils in strata lower than the late Triassic. So no, the fossil record does not say that dinosaurs or birds have always been around. We don't find anything that anyone would reasonably call a bird until the Jurassic, which is even later. So no, the fossil record does not at all say that. Now, you could argue that there's a ghost lineage there, Timothy Clarey, and that actually they did exist before that. But you've already rejected the entire concept of ghost lineages, Tim. So, sorry. Like, you can't even have an internally coherent idea. I feel like your idea making sense on its own terms is like the bare minimum for an idea. Because if it doesn't make sense on its own terms, it's not even technically an idea. It's just a series of nonsense things that you spout. And that's where we are with Timothy Clarey. He doesn't have an idea. He has a bunch of contradictory statements that don't actually correspond to anything that even possibly could be true, logically speaking. Like, I'm not even saying it's unevidenced. I'm saying that just the simple laws of logic preclude Timothy Clarey because he contradicts himself. Or, well, preclude him from being right. Obviously, he exists, so they don't preclude him. They preclude his various contradictory things.
All we see in the rock record.
Yeah, I feel like that makes it, it's important for our listeners and viewers to do this research and know, because if we are listening to what secular science says, they're...
I feel like...
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly how does she propose that their viewers do research?
So here's the thing.
Because if all she means is Google stuff,
Mhm.
and Google incompetently at that, or use, what's his name, Eric Hoven's very
his
restrictive search engine.
His Young Earth Creationist search engine.
Yeah, that's not doing research.
No.
What does she mean by that?
So here's the thing. I don't think she knows. And here's why. One of the things you'll notice about her response here is it doesn't actually engage with anything that Timothy Clarey said in any actual specificity, right? He could have said literally anything, and then she could have come away with this response. Ivana does not know what he just said. Because Ivana, and this is not an insult to her, right? I don't actually have anything particularly against Ivana. I think that she is more of a dupe. She's been duped. She's a dupee, not a duper situation. She's clearly not equipped with a background to understand what Timothy Clarey is saying, which is fine. Most people aren't. But as a result, I think that's why she's giving this nothing of a response, because I don't think she knows what's going on. And I don't think that there's going to be any attempt to actually get her to understand this. Because, let's be honest, she's not actually here to be educated by Timothy Clarey. She's here to read off a set of questions and get Timothy Clarey to say things that also their audience isn't going to get. Because at no point is the goal of Young Earth creationism to educate people about science. Not the point. The point is to keep people in a particular brand of Christianity, and then a far distant third point is to maybe convince some ignorant people to join that particular branch of Christianity by tricking them into thinking that science supports it. Jasper, I am not sure what to do with that J. Jasper Degenuis? I am sorry, Jasper. I don't know what to do with that J. Please let me know. But Jasper says, for €6, 225 million years ago is only halfway to the Phanerozoic. Yeah, that's the thing about dinosaurs. They've only been around for about half of the time that the entire Phanerozoic has been the current era. I don't know, I phrased that very awkwardly. My apologies. But yeah, they're basically 50% of the fossil record has dinosaurs, and that's only if you ignore the pre-Phanerozoic fossils, like microfossils and whatnot. Yeah, they've not always existed. By the way, do let me know what to do with that J in your last name. J is the most annoying letter in the Latin alphabet. Some people are like, no, it's C. No, it's J. Because there's like 3 or 4 different ways that it could be pronounced, and there's generally not a whole lot of great context clues if you're just looking at one name in isolation.
They're taking, like you said, just things that are in existence and then fitting it to mold their theory or their line of thinking, rather than let's look at what the evidence says and then, inform ourselves on that.
Ivana, we'll take a drink here.
Bless her heart.
Once again, Ivana, you are working for an organization. And when you applied for that job, you had to affirm a statement of faith that included conclusions that could at least hypothetically be overturned by evidence. And you had to sign on that that was your conclusion no matter what. You had to believe these things in order to be employed here. Any place that makes you sign such a statement or affirm such a statement or anything like that as a condition for your employment is not a place that is taking evidence as it comes and coming to the most likely conclusion based on that evidence. Because if that's what they were doing, they wouldn't need a statement of faith. Statements of faith are for things that you can't actually demonstrate. Because if you could demonstrate them, you just do that. That doesn't make the statements wrong. It just makes them not currently demonstrable. But that's the situation you're in. Does anyone know what the statement of faith is for the journal Science or the journal Nature?
There isn't one.
No, there isn't.
There isn't one.
You know what the statement of faith
They
is?
they don't make you sign a bias sheet.
Right. You know what the statement of faith
Because
is?
the evidence and your data, it speaks for itself.
You know what the statement of faith is for getting a degree at, say, Harvard or Rutgers or the University of California? There isn't one.
Nope.
There isn't one. So anytime that you accuse science of just coming up with a conclusion and then forcing the evidence to fit it, you are projecting, Ivana. Because that is explicitly what your side is doing, and it is explicitly what the other side is at the very least trying to avoid by having systems like peer reviews. Because it's true. Scientists do sometimes look for data to fit their preconceived notions, because they want to be right. Nien House. Oh, okay. So that's apparently how Jasper, it should be Jasper Nien House. Or Nien House? I'm going to go with Nien House for now. So yeah, it is true that scientists have biases, and they sometimes do, in fact, try to fit the data to fit their conclusions. But that's why they have peer review. Creationists don't have peer review. You can tell because of the things that get through into their publications. But there is no peer review there. I mean, the Answers Research Journal published a paper in which the author got what a pigostyle is, which is an anatomical feature of birds, exactly backwards. And claimed that all of the animals in her chart that didn't have pigostyles did, and all the ones that did, didn't. That got past the peer review of the Answers Research Journal. Something that anyone who's ever looked at a bird skeleton with a label could show you is wrong. Which means no one who actually had done so ever looked at that paper. Which means no one peer reviewed that paper. I will always hold up the paper, The Debate Over the Classification of Archaeopteryx by Gabriella Haynes, as a prime example of the fact that there just is no peer review at the Answers Research Journal. I'm not even contesting her conclusion in that one. Just the body of that article had so many mistakes that don't even necessarily make her wrong, but they're just very obvious mistakes that need to be fixed, that there is no way it went through any kind of peer review. Then you can say, well, you know, they sent it to Jeffrey Tompkins to read. Guess what? Jeffrey Tompkins isn't a peer in terms of paleontology. It's not peer review if you send it to someone who doesn't know what the paper's about to review it, right? If I want to publish a paper about quantum physics, and you send it to a botanist, that guy can't peer review my quantum physics paper.
See, when they said peer review, they just thought they meant, like, their friends.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're about the same age, so they must be peers, right? What it means. Yeah, that's not actually what that means. Mark Agamotto 1313 Smith for $5 says, for Harvard, the statement of faith would be, no matter what, Harvard is better than Yale. Okay, yeah, and that might be the statement of faith for Harvard. Good point. Yeah. I actually had a professor of mine recommend that I apply to Harvard once, and I was like, I don't think that that's going to work out.
Yeah. I mean,
like, what money?
My ACD score was high enough to where I was getting letters from Princeton, but it was just, it's not feasible. Like, yeah, if you give me a full ride, I'll go.
Right, yeah.
And they didn't, so.
Yeah. And you can say, well, I mean, weren't you getting, like, the GI Bill? And I was. But the GI Bill has limits, and also it's, like, living expenses stipend and its book stipend also have limits. And there's a reason why pretty much everyone who has the GI Bill ends up going to, like, a state college and not to, like, Ivy League colleges.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is free college if your college doesn't cost too much.
What's amazing is they're ignoring data. They're ignoring the rock data.
Projection!
Tim, I would love for you to put... Okay, I know he's not going to, but I would love for Tim to actually just say, here is a paper that shows data that has been ignored by the paleontological community at large. Just one. Pick one. Because I'm not aware of any data that's being ignored by paleontology broadly or geology broadly. If there is such data, I actually happen to know geologists and paleontologists. I could bring it to their attention, and they could stop ignoring it. I don't think there is any such. And the fact that Tim never actually gives us concrete examples and won't even name his sources as Alan Fiducia and Lingam Soliar and Zhang, which I'm pretty sure now is the actual name I was thinking. The fact that he won't even name them means I don't think he has a case here. Because what you normally do when you're complaining about what people in science are doing is you actually cite those papers that you think are wrong. Like when I said, hey, I have a problem with how creationists treat, say, bird systematics, right? I can actually point you to the name and author of a paper. I can say the debate over the classification of Archaeopteryx as a bird, Gabriella Haynes, I don't remember exactly what year, but I think it was 2023. Might have been 2022. Answers Research Journal. That is more than enough for you to pull up a paper. And then when I critique that paper, you can check that paper to see if it says what I say it does. If you look at my videos, when I mention a paper that is the source for a claim that I'm making, I usually name the paper, and there's also a link to it in my description. Tim won't even name the authors of the papers he's getting this from. That is a sign of dishonesty when you won't even tell people the names of the people you're getting your talking points from. Because if you didn't have something to hide, you would give your sources. Anyone who's hiding their sources from you is someone you shouldn't trust, because there's no good reason to hide your sources unless your sources don't actually support your conclusions. Of course, some people are too stupid to realize even that, and they'll just name the source that doesn't support them anyway, which is why we have Trojan source as a trigger.
Trojan source. Always a delight.
Yeah.
They're just doing whatever they want almost, regardless of the data. They're ignoring the evidence that this is collagen and
I'm gonna take a drink here.
Ignoring evidence, the biggest creationist projection of all time.
I have read the collagen paper, the main collagen paper that Alan Fiducia and buddies put out, right? Here's a few things. One, some of the things they identified as potential fossilized collagen weren't even fossilized anything. They were drill marks made by the person preparing the fossil. The way I know that is that that person responded to the paper, not ignoring it, Tim, and said, those aren't collagen fibers, those are marks from my drill that I made when preparing this fossil. So in this paper in which Alan Fiducia and buddies are arguing that these are collagen fibers, they couldn't even tell the difference between fossilized strands and tool marks. Doesn't bode well. And further, they actually were then later refuted about 3 years later by a very conclusive paper that showed that they were absolutely not collagen fibers and had to be in integumentary structure, because melanosomes aren't in collagen, but they are in integumentary structures like scales and hair and feathers. Fits of Biashi's Rage has just gifted a Dapper Dinosaur membership. Thank you very much. We will take a drink for that. So, when Timothy Clarey says that they don't even respond to this, they don't deal with it, or that they ignore it, I want you to know that he is directly lying to you, or he just has not read the literature. One of those two things has to be true. Because the claims in these papers that he's referencing, well, he's not even referencing, that he's alluding to, are in fact directly refuted in the literature. They're not ignored. They're not brushed aside. They're not simply just dismissed because of bias. They are directly countered. Because as much as they're doing nonsense, the bandits are still good enough at science to actually get published. And so they're responded to.
They're calling them protofeathers. They're ignoring that birds are found in the rocks before these so-called bird-like dinosaurs. They're putting feathers on things that have no evidence of feathers, like Velociraptor.
Velociraptor has been found with ulnar quill knobs. Now, you know what a quill is, right? It's a kind of feather. And a quill knob seems like a knob associated with a quill. And the ulna is one of your arm bones, right? It's the one that if you put your arm down and your palms are just facing towards your thighs, it's the one that faces back, or the one that Vashanti is showing you on camera. Right there, now her ulna is pointing. Well, actually, your radius is the other side. That's your radius on that side that you pointed to. Yeah, you're showing everyone the ulna. If you put your hand so that it faces you, now it's on the bottom. Can't hear you. Yeah, it's the ulna.
That's not facing towards the back. You said putting your palms facing your thighs and it's facing the back.
Okay, when
This
you're
is facing
standing,
the back.
when you're standing straight up, and your hands are just down by your side with your palms facing your thighs, the ulna is facing backwards.
Yeah, but I'm holding my hand up like this.
Yeah, okay, well, you're not standing.
Dude. Ulna.
It is still the only, yes. Anyway, a quill knob is actually a scar left on the bone because of the attachment point of a quill. Quills are actually deeply rooted onto the bone, unlike most other feathers, which are just deeply rooted into the skin. And because they tug on the bone anytime that there's any kind of tensile stress on that feather, which is pretty common, the bone actually starts to break down slightly, gets little tiny microfractures. So osteocytes come in and they heal that bone. They fill in those cracks there. When they do that, though, they add to the total volume of that little area, which means that over time, as the animal lives and tensile strength keeps occurring on those feathers, little bumps start to appear on the bone everywhere where a quill knob or where a quill attaches, and those are called quill knobs. Velociraptor has them. The only reason to have quill knobs, you have quills. Quills are feathers. Velociraptor has direct fossil evidence for feathers. Also, I want to point out that Microraptor is in not just the same family as Velociraptor, but the same subfamily. So this would be like finding a new fossil wolf species and then just saying, yeah, maybe it didn't have fur. Yeah, maybe. But the most likely option is that it did have fur, because we don't have any canine species that don't have fur. So when you find a new one as a fossil, even if it doesn't have preserved fur, you're probably going to reconstruct it with fur anyway. That's called phylogenetic bracketing. And even if we didn't have ulnar quill knobs...
Dapper. You know what? There's a modern dog that doesn't have fur.
Yes, there is that Mexican hairless dog.
The Xolo.
Although, also many of them do have fur.
Yeah, some do.
Yeah. It turns out that it's actually the furless or the hairless trait is actually like a recessive trait. And oh no, it's a dominant trait, but if any of them are born and they're homozygous for the trait, then that's fatal. Which is why you can't actually have a pure breeding population of hairless Xolos. You have to have some that have fur, or the population is going to die. So yeah, that's what it is. Philipunk, half dog, half canine for $5 says, those scientists only disagree with us because they're biased. Our biases are valid, though, with a triangle mean. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. So, yeah, we have direct evidence of Velociraptor having quill knobs, and we have phylogenetic bracketing that makes it unreasonable to reconstruct Velociraptor in any other way than feathered.
And all these, and T-Rexes, and they've even shown...
Actually, we don't have conclusive evidence either way for Tyrannosaurus rex. What we do have are some adult skin impressions that do not show feathers. However, they're all from places where feathers are relatively unlikely to show up in Mesozoic dinosaurs, and even in some cases in modern ones. For instance, things like the thigh or the bottom of the throat. Two places that you'll notice modern ostriches, say, don't have feathers. So, it's one of those situations where it's like, I personally don't think adult T-Rex had feathers. I have good reason to think that the juveniles had feathers, although very simple downy feathers, not pennaceous feathers. But I also don't know that either. Yes?
Jasper noted in the chat that some dogs have a crust instead of fur, such as the corn dog.
A compelling argument, and now I kind of want a corn dog.
Mm.
With
What
mustard.
toppings do you put on yours?
I'm a mustard
I was just
guy.
going to say, is it just mustard? Because that's really the only correct answer.
It's just mustard. I have tried them with ketchup and mustard. I don't like it. I think the cornbread is already mixed together. The cornbread is already sweet enough that it doesn't need the extra sugar from the ketchup. I've never tried with relish. I feel like it wouldn't stick on very well, and it would just be messy. So yeah, I'm a mustard on corn dogs, and if mustard isn't available, I'm just not going to put anything on it. I'm just going to eat it. So yeah, mustard for corn dogs is the way I'm going. And anyone else who has any other ideas about corn dog toppings is wrong. No, I don't care. Put whatever you want on your It's like with the pineapple on pizza.
Congratulations,
like, I'm not a fan, but
everybody,
go have
by getting a Dapper membership, you have now signed your agreement that there's only one acceptable topping for corn dogs.
Yeah, by being a member, you have implicitly agreed to agree with all of my conclusions about food toppings. So, deal with it.
As I mentioned earlier, that T-Rexes didn't have feathers. They kind of
Honey
had...
mustard, I agree, Pibblepunk.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a variety of mustards that are okay. I'm fine with just having a standard like French's mustard, but other mustards are even better.
To grudgingly admit that T-Rexes didn't have feathers after all, because they found enough skin imprints of it without feathers. We have skin imprints.
Oh my God.
Okay, so y'all might not remember this because this goes back to the first time we covered this particular video, in which Ivana pointed out that she had seen at a museum depictions of juvenile T-Rexes with down. That has still not been overturned, because one of the things you might know about animals is that they can change what and how much integumentary structures they have as they age. So, for instance, elephants have very, very sparse hair cover, but they're actually born with pretty significant amounts of fur. Humans, even, are sometimes born with pretty significant amounts of hair, called lanugo. Now, most humans have their lanugo fall out before they're actually born, and so they're born essentially without that fur. But not all of them. Sometimes humans retain their lanugo until not long after birth, in which case they are born with basically a coat of fur that goes away.
There's
so
also,
why?
is it hypertrichosis?
Yeah, but that's not something that usually goes away as you age.
Yeah, I was gonna. Okay.
So we also know that that happens with birds. For instance, when a baby chicken is born, it has a downy coating. Those fall out and are replaced with pennaceous feathers as the animal ages. So we know
Baby
that
ducks.
many organisms have differences in their integument between being newly hatched or born and being an adult. And we know that Tyrannosaurus is in a group of animals that we do have direct evidence of feathers for. For instance, Eutyrannus had downy feathers well into adulthood. In fact, its whole life, most likely. It was living in a cold place. And downy feathers are good insulation. And the reason why things like elephants and other very, very large animals tend not to have big fluffy coats is because they tend not to need them. There's this thing called gigantothermy, where regardless of your metabolic rate, if you're just big enough, you're going to be warm on the inside just because you have like a metabolism going and it's really big, and because of the inverse square law, or not inverse square law, sorry, the square cube law when it comes to surface area versus volume. It's just going to keep you warm. And so really big animals
Lots
have
of
less
muscle
need.
and fat.
Really big animals have less need for insulation. But a baby T-Rex is going to be born at about the size of an American football, or a little bit smaller than a everywhere else football. That's small. That's going to need some kind of warmth, especially because in the place where T-Rex lived, it probably didn't snow, but we know that
Oof.
that part of Montana got cold. There were probably occasional frosts.
I just remembered the birth scene in Alien Romulus.
Sorry about that. So we know that T-Rex lived in places where it got cold. Cold enough that it might be dangerous for a baby T-Rex. So do we have direct evidence of downy feathers on T-Rex? No. Do we have evidence that suggests that adult T-Rex probably didn't have down? Yeah, probably. Do we have any evidence either way for baby T-Rexes? Actually, yes. We have positive evidence for the existence of down in baby T-Rexes because we know it would, one, be adaptive, and two, we know that they are in a group of animals that had downy feathers. So Timothy Clarey isn't entirely wrong when he says that we have evidence against adult T-Rex having feathers, or T-Rex having feathers. It's just that he's using so little actual nuance that he's basically lying to us. Jake, insert clever Dapper inside joke here. Nelson, who's been a member for 22 months, and is at the amulet level, says, "My daughter was premature and fuzzy. That's why her nickname is Changita." Nice. And yeah, that's one of those things. This is something that happens to animals. Their integument changes as they age. And apparently, Timothy Clarey just isn't aware of that, despite the fact that he has a very visibly receding hairline, and therefore probably should know that animals have different kinds of integument as they age. And this is not me making fun of his hairline. I'm just saying, hey, Tim, you are a direct example of the fact that some animals have their integumentary structures change and fall out as they age. Let's see. Yep, no, I already read that one. Here we go.
Of many dinosaurs, and none of them show feathers. Yeah, the best you get is these.
I mean, except for the ones that do, which is many, many of them. Remember that time we went to the museum, Vishanti, in person, in real life? And you just looked at a fossil and you were like, oh, those are the feathers. I was like, those are very, very obvious. Yeah, it's very obvious.
Yeah, I distinctly recall seeing the impressions and going, oh, those are very clearly feathers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not very ambiguous. This is not something where, like, I have to break out my microscope. I'm not sure.
No, there was no question whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I made a very, concerted effort to take photos of that because I wanted to show people, hey, in fact, you could add that to any slideshows you want. But, yeah, there was no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, this is very, very obvious.
collagen, these hair-like features come.
Oh, cognitive trifurcation says I just pointed out the reason he denies this whole thing though is because he doesn't want to admit he's going bald.
Ah,
Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just an ego thing. Look, my human suit has been going bald for a very long time, and I've just kind of just accepted that. Tim, you should accept it. It's fine.
Toblerson says we have feathers so well preserved we know what color they were.
Exactly. We even know that they had a iridescent sheen in some cases. For instance, Microraptor, which again, same subfamily as Velociraptor. We've had such good feather impressions from Microraptor that we've been able to examine the microstructure and find that they're very similar to the microstructures of crows. And crows have a greenish blue sheen at certain angles because of the microstructure of their feathers.
Iridescence.
Microraptor had that same kind of iridescence, and we know that for a fact because of how well preserved the feathers are.
Isn't it the case that feathers usually start out black pigmented and then later colors develop from there? Did I misremember that?
I don't believe that's the case, but I'm also not an expert at like
in terms of colors, we find black the most common.
Black is probably the most. Well, yeah.
Right?
So black feathers are some of the most common feathers, primarily because melanin is also a protein that can strengthen feathers. It's also why a lot of feathers that aren't entirely black have dark tips, because those are the areas that are suffer the most wear, and so having a black tip is going to reduce that, even if you just need
collagen thing. That's where my brain was missing a critical detail.
Okay.
But yeah, that whole thing. I just
Josh,
love that we could have ancient corvid ancestors.
Well, near ancestors.
Let me have this.
Okay. Josh McGee's just gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships, so we will take 5 drinks for that. Thank you so much. Here we go. 1, 2, 4, and 5. All right, everyone. It is about time to start wrapping things up here. I think we can get at least one more week out of Tim here. So looks like next week we'll be back with Tim, and then probably we'll be able to go to another creationist, or maybe it won't even be a creationist. Maybe I'll bring in Roger or something. I don't know. Jean, you know that none of the options are actually going to be smart people saying smart things, right? The entire point of the show is idiots saying idiot things, or liars saying lies. Bits of Bias Sheets Rage for $2 says AIG is a bag of black. Hey, whatever color is fine. I'll take a drink with 12. So, Vishanti, do you have anything that you want to tell people about that's coming up for you?
I'm behind in all my homework. So what's coming up for me is going to be me prioritizing my homework first.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And then after that, the things that I can do after that will take priority.
Okay.
Such as life. I mean, listen, the 2 to 3 weeks of holidays really threw off my everything. So
Borg Emporia says, let's do Mud Fossil University, and it reminded me, my favorite line from Mud Fossil University. It's in a video I didn't cover, but he says, now you see, I don't do pareidolia. It's dude, that's literally all you ever do.
What?
And then in that same
He's
video...
literally pareidolia the channel.
Right. And then later in that same video, he says he was wrong about what some rock structures were because he just kind of glanced at them and assumed that they were what they kind of looked like to him. And it's okay, Roger, that's just you doing pareidolia. That's you admitting to pareidolia. What are you doing, Roger? Yeah, that's when he switched from a rock being a giant penis to a rock being a giant villus from inside of a large intestine. It's just
oh, okay.
Okay, cool.
Sure, Jan.
My favorite thing is that there's no consistency on how big the creatures he thinks existed are. Because in order for that to be one of those little hair-like structures from inside an intestine versus, a penis, that animal has to be much, much different in scale.
It's really hard for me to wrap my brain around the fact that he thinks that there were A, real dragons, and B, that they're the size of entire mountain ranges.
Mm-hmm.
What did they eat? How did they breathe?
You know, he thinks the entire west coast of North America is one giant scorpion. Yeah.
Oh, Roger.
The Aleutian Islands, that's a stinger from a scorpion.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Okay.
Anyway, so let's take a look at what's coming up on this channel. Tuesday. It's going to be Kent with Bent. I believe it's going to be. I'm gonna double check. Yep, it's going to be Master Kent and the Metallic Armor, which is in fact the name of a Power Rangers episode, which is why I have Kent Hovind's face photoshopped onto. Well, I say photoshopped, just stuck onto the body of the White Ranger in metallic armor.
Pasted on, yay.
Yeah, like this is not exactly a fancy Photoshop. Jasper, have full name up. Nien House, I believe is what I was told to pronounce it as. For €2 says AIG is a bag of long hard rocks. I'll take a drink. And we will also update the counter. Thank you very much. So that is what's coming up on Tuesday. Then on Thursday, I have Frank Turek is Clueless, which is the first bit in a multi-part series about Frank Turek talking about science and evolution and whatnot. He's really, really bad at it, and Greg Kukul keeps interrupting him, and you can tell during the course of the video that Frank is really upset about this, but he's trying to keep the peace, and he's like not calling out Greg, because you can tell just by the look on his face. Multiple times he just wants to be like, "Shut up, Greg! Let me finish."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's actually pretty funny. So that's going to be Thursday. The Tuesday show is again going to be at 6 p.m. Pacific, and then the Frank Turek is going to be at noon Pacific. Then on Saturday, looks like we'll be back doing this, and Vishanti is invited back. I don't know if Vishanti, you want to come back? Okay. So we'll be back with Vishanti, hopefully finishing up this video. Then I want to say that on election night here in the US, which is November 5th, we're going to be doing a Kent with Bent. Normal time. And there is going to be a special rule, though, which is no election talk. This Kent with Bent is not only going to be a Kent with Bent, but it is also going to be a break from the relentless political and election news and coverage and talk that will be the only thing on American media just for so long. So if you need a space to do something else, where people aren't allowed to bring up the election, that is a place for you. And I'm instructing all my moderators, if you see someone on that stream talking about election news, giving updates on like electoral college vote counts, or like counties coming in with election results or anything like that, that person gets a timeout.
Timeout.
We're not going to ban them, but they're going to get a timeout, and you can increase the amount of time that they're timed out as they keep violating that rule. Don't ban anyone, but keep timing them out if they do that. It is not allowed. We are not talking about the election on that night. So, with that being said, I think that covers it. I am going to be going over to my Discord channel in just a few minutes to watch the first 4 episodes of Power Rangers RPM, which in my opinion is one of the best seasons in the entire franchise. So, I'm a big fan. If this piques your interest, it starts out by pointing out that basically humans are almost extinct because they've lost a war with AI, which I feel is very topical, because Butlerian Jihad now.
Correct.
Yeah, so...
For you, Serena Butler.
And your little baby.
And your little baby.
Was it Julia or something like that? I don't remember the baby's
I don't
name.
remember offhand.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, come check that out if you want to. And I will see all of you, hopefully, on Tuesday. Bye, everybody.
Bye!
Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovind, Phil Cavara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, North Texas Fossils, John Ackerman, Strawberry Vein, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, Elron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Calvin Brostig Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Sphincter of Doom, and Lawless. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.